Hello and welcome to episode 23 of the Africa Football Business Show. Today we are going to discuss financing football development in Africa, a crucial topic for global football, not just in Africa, but since this is the Africa Football Business Show, we'll try and keep it Africa. We are very privileged to have two excellent guests with us, professionals in their fields who have worked extensively in sports and specifically in football. And I will not say much at this moment, but before I continue, I'd just like to recognize our partners who are making these possible for us, and that is OTB Africa, Parma Sports, CBeyond Leadership Forum, iSportLand, and the Football Business Academy. And to move on with the show, I would like to welcome our guests. That is Theo Ajadi and Ebru Koksal to give us a brief intro about themselves. We'll start with you, Ebru. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I guess I have the honor to be the 50th guest of the show. Theo was kind enough to give the honor to me. He's number 51. I have several titles within football. Currently, chair of Women in Football and also an independent non-executive director on the Professional Footballers Association in the UK. And my day job is back in finance. I do wealth management with J. Stern & Co. I started out my career actually in investment banking in New York. And after 9 years between New York and Istanbul with two international financial corporations, I ended up working for a private equity fund, and the fund invested in Galatasaray 8 months after I joined. The project was my project, something that I worked on, and I had just delivered my second child. My kids are 1.5 years apart. My boss was not your modern sensitive boss. he basically told me after 3 weeks of giving birth that I couldn't keep up with the pace of the funds with two very young children. Complete discrimination and prejudice, but what can you do? He terminated my contract. Luckily, the president of the club, Galatasaray, was my former mergers and acquisitions client from my investment banking days. And he told me, Ebru, this is a very, very fast growing and extremely challenging, but also enjoyable industry. Why don't you consider it? And basically, after 10 years of investment banking, I found myself in football in year 2000. And I've been ever since in several different roles within Galatasaray and becoming CEO and then board member. And I worked as a consultant for FIFA and UEFA for several years, especially in their football development projects. And I was also the first woman to serve on the board of European Club Association in the 2010-2012 period. So quite a long time veteran in football.
Thank you very much, Ebru. Quite a profile there. Welcome to the Africa Football Business Show. Theo, a bit of background, where you come from, why are you in football sports at the moment?
So yeah, that's quite a hard one to follow up on, but I'll do my best. So,
that's why I'm number 50.
Yeah, I know, 51 doesn't have as good a ring to it. But my name is Theo, and my background is sort of corporate finance before I made the move into sport. So I worked in corporate finance, sort of transaction advisory services to sort of large multinational organizations. In that time, sort of gained my chartered accountant qualification, as well as my chartered tax advisor qualification. Obviously, I love sport and sort of had a long-held interest in working in sport. So obviously, I think a lot of people understand and are aware of sort of the Deloitte Sports Business Group and our publications, which first grew my interest in working in the field. And from building up my sort of network and running a blog on football finance for a couple of years, I luckily managed to gain a role over 2 years ago in sports business. And since then have sort of worked extensively with leagues, clubs, and national federations on strategic projects, and largely as well in sports M&A. And just a bit of background about the Sports Business Group. We're a team based in the UK where we work full-time on sports engagements across the whole spectrum of different stakeholders in the game, not just in football, but wider in sports as well, both on strategic and sort of financial projects. We're sort of a team of just over 20 and sit as the global hub for the Deloitte brand in sport, which is obviously quite extensive, with offices across the globe, which we sit at the center of for sport.
Excellent, Theo. I would just like to continue with you, Theo, and perhaps if you could share with us a little bit more about how Deloitte Sports Business Group works in the football space, in the sports space. What are some of the projects or programs or services do you offer the sports space? Because talking to similar firms here in Kenya, in Africa, none has a sports function. That's what I've come to realize as I was trying to prepare for this. So what kind of projects do you do, just to talk to our colleagues in the corporate space?
Sure. So as a group, we've been running for over sort of 25 years. So a lot of experience in that group well before I joined. In terms of projects we work in sport, in football specifically, that can vary quite significantly. Our goal is to serve the football ecosystem across all the objectives that they have. That can vary from sort of regulatory, financial, commercial, strategic. So on the side where I normally work is on the transaction side. So I'm more focused on sort of helping either on the buy side, so investors looking to invest into the sports business. So a good example that we might come to later is the Mansour Group investing into Right to Dream Limited, which is an organization that does a lot in Africa around sort of talent pathways and also owns a Danish football team as well. So we would support them on understanding the sort of the football market, and then sort of doing the transaction advisory services, which sort of revolves around doing due diligence on the target just ahead of a potential acquisition. And we also help quite extensively around regulatory work as well. I can't talk too much about that, but we sort of support some of the major stakeholders in sort of shaping the men's and women's game. A recent project that I worked on, which was really enjoyable, which Ebru might have a bit more to say on as well, is around women's football. So we assisted FIFA in benchmarking the women's game, just to sort of help with the professionalization and development of that going forward. And that's something that I think is an area where Africa as a continent in football is in need of some sort of development as well. So that's an area that we might come to later. And we sort of assist around Stadia and many other strategic projects. There's so much that I could sort of talk to on this topic.
Excellent. Thank you, Theo, for sharing that background about what you're doing with the Deloitte Sports Business Group. I think one thing we have to appreciate immediately is that perhaps you're working in very developed markets, very developed sports economies. Perhaps not where Africa is at the moment, at least mostly sub-Saharan Africa, where we find that especially football development is still very much a preserve of FIFA. You know, we don't have the kind of private investors, not that many. FIFA is still the prominent financier of football development on the continent, and they have programs such as the FIFA 2.0 program, whereby the monies they make from the Men's World Cup, which is their biggest asset, kind of commands, I think, more than 90% of FIFA's revenue. And they redistribute these to national associations for the development of football. You have done some work with FIFA, Ebru. What's your take on this model that is used by FIFA for the development of football globally, and what do you think about an underdeveloped sports market like Africa?
FIFA obviously had for many years different types of aids and assistance to member associations, but with the election of President Infantino, it was a project that he brought in to basically collect all the existing different types of aids into one big package and putting more rules around it, because a lot of the times the reporting and auditing side of these aids was not all that great. Sometimes the funds given to countries were not necessarily used for the purpose that was stated, or a portion was used for that, but wrong invoices were submitted, and the rest of the funds were sometimes channeled out or used for different things. So it was definitely a good idea to put everything into one bucket and put rules around how they are dispersed. But fast forward a few years, if we look at the report of since 2016, the funds that were available would have been 2.7 billion or 2.7 billion more that is not used yet for this 2016-2022 cycle. It's a 2 times 3 year cycle, basically. Only 1.8 billion have been used, and part of that is, of course, the requirements for disbursement. Quite a few of the countries, unfortunately, are unable to fulfill the requirements. So the way, again, if we look at the CAF region, we were discussing in the prep call with you, CAF only used 439 million so far in the last 4 or 5 years. And currently there are 306 outstanding projects. Some are approved, some are waiting for approval. But what we are seeing is much of the funds allocated have been used for infrastructure. And what's in the definition of infrastructure is, of course, pitches, stadiums, training facilities, and headquarters as well. Because the infrastructure is quite low or lagging in Africa, that was probably the first priority. The other categories are for development of competition, for competitions, for youth development, for example. So those parts have not been really used, unfortunately, a whole lot. It seems like, especially what's called capacity building. That's more again the building of the pipeline, from grassroots all the way up to elite, and then investments in national teams and making them available to travel, and some other projects as well. But again, if we look at the other regions, in case of Africa, the funds were used mostly for infrastructure investments rather than the other categories. So I think whether it's men's football or women's football, needless to say, player development is a very important component of the investment part. And we know that the African players take up quite a big volume within the global professional football industry, but a lot of them are not leaving at an age where they would get benefits for their raising club, right? Many of them, one way or another, are being transferred as minors, even though it's not, legal. And if there was the local capacity with good competitions and revenue structures in place, some of these players could stay and help develop the global audience, to watch them, and then they can move at a little later age where the clubs raising them would make some money out of it as well, not just the solidarity fees, which is a very small portion of the transfer fees at the end of the day. So I think as a whole, the continent needs to develop more, capacity in terms of a better structured youth development, as well as more rigorous competitions, which would then bring in more spectators, more revenues, and hopefully better conditions and salaries for the players.
Very interesting, Ebru. I'll just take you back a bit to something you've brought up, and that is the fact that we are not able to even use what FIFA is providing. What we can say is rightfully our own. I was just looking at the figure that says 32% for the 2016-2018 cycle. Africa was only able to use 32% of the funds that were available. And this was because the national associations, 19 of them, were unable to meet basic requirements from FIFA. So if you can just shed more light on this, what are some of these requirements from a governance perspective? And why is it important that African national associations and other football organizations continue to improve on their governance and also build capacity for the game? And how can they do this?
Yeah, I actually did not see, needless to say, the reasons why only 32% of the funds were used, and in which aspects actually the African member associations could not fulfill. But oversight is one of them for sure, which is even simple things such as presenting audit reports, right? From external auditors. Not everyone can afford to bring in Deloitte for an external audit, but there are, great qualified accountants who can perform the audits. So things like having, their normal governance structures in place with the right kind of controls and these, normally each member association per cycle is supposed to get $6 million. That's quite a bit of money, to develop certain new competitions or invest in youth. But that part is pretty much in the end dispersed through, as we said, prerequisites, right? And things like the audit reports, having competitions at least in different levels, and then several different requirements that, if you really put your head around it and have the right staff and structure in place, shouldn't be too difficult to do. But of course, you need also the support of the confederation, giving some guidance. And we also see that not only in Africa, in quite a few of the member associations, there is internal political wars for power, within the member associations, and it's hindering progress in many cases.
Yeah, I think when doing the background about you, you carried out some work, for example, for the Turkish Football Federation in terms of restructuring. I would just like to understand, for example, what were you able to do for them, and in such a short time? I think you had a very short stint with the Turkish Football Federation. Yeah. What kind of work did you do for them, and how can these, for example, be borrowed in other jurisdictions?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we work with one of the big international consultants. Accenture was our advisor, but Turkish FA had a huge budget. As you know, Turkish League generates the 6th largest revenues in Europe. So it was affordable. Not everyone, unfortunately, can afford it. But we saw that the staff structure was extremely bloated. We didn't need at least 30% of those people. And there were 5 deputies, but 4 of them didn't have anybody reporting to them, right? They were political appointments. They were, important people's relatives or whatever, and they were getting good salaries. There were quite a few people just getting their salary from ATM and not even coming to the office. So that was, again, 10 years ago. I'm sure it's much better now, but a lot of these, unfortunately, organizations are seen as places where you can just park certain people and they don't need to perform. So it all starts with the right strategy, putting the right strategy in place. What's important for the country? Where is its competitive advantage? Should it focus on the national team? Should it focus on building the pipeline? Is grassroots more relevant and important? So, what are the priorities? And then who are the right people to deliver this? And unfortunately, in all of global football, the way the boards are composed is not based on merit, right? It's based on, elections and popularity. And only when you do sincerely recruit, like in England, Theo will know quite well, there are quite a few independent board members on the Premier League board, the FA board, now the PFA board. That's how I came into the PFA board. And you do go through very rigorous recruitment procedures for the board. And once you get into that boardroom, then it's your job to challenge, take discussions forward. So it all starts with the, board compositions, general assembly compositions, and then trickles down to obviously the permanent staff in the organization. So that's what we tried to look at. We also mapped out how the federation should over time in Turkey relinquish its responsibility of organizing the league, so turn into a Premier League, turn into a La Liga, and that divestiture plan was put in place, but has still not been implemented even after 10 years. So that's what we did over 2 months, basically. And
I think
I'm
Go
sure
ahead.
Theo and his sports team, good friends there, like Dan and Izzy and Tim. That's what they do for a living, right? Help organizations become more efficient, more agile, and performing better.
Yeah, I'd say just from sort of an African perspective, is setting that base level. Like, it's really important, obviously, to accessing funding, but you're only as strong as your weakest link in a lot of situations, and setting that base level of governance, of sort of player development, of across the whole facet of the organization, and having that structure in place, is then you can start looking at individual areas and saying, where do we want to put our focus in? But until you have that critical mass and that base level foundation, there's not much you can do as an organization if you're too one-sided in one area where your player development is strong, but you haven't got the systems in place to capture any of the revenue from that, then there's no point, essentially. So it's about setting that base level, which I think hopefully with some of the initiatives that FIFA and CAF are putting in place, that will become evident in the coming years.
Yeah.
Yes.
So on that front, also, I think what's important is with these kinds of, great aid initiatives, there should also be some almost not off the shelf, but
Yes.
just basic templates about, okay, if your priority is restructuring, here is how you do it. Or what I hear is quite a few of the member associations, not only in Africa, in several other places, because they only have like 2 employees, 3 employees, few board members. They can't even put together the application for the FIFA Forward projects in the right way that would, get approved and the funds dispersed. Even if they do get the funds, they don't have, again, the resources to implement such a strategic development project, for example. So I think one initiative that FIFA did recently is a great one, which was working together with one of the best talent development consultants and doing an assessment within 120 countries with the FAs, leagues, and selected clubs to really assess where youth development is in these countries, so that they can also then, as a next step, identify development areas. So it's not just making funds available, but making some bulk deals with someone like Deloitte, for example, right? So that, these MAs can get the support that they need once they have the money, because they usually don't know how to do it.
Yes. And I think as well, there's a real opportunity across the continent to have a more synergistic sort of perspective in how you're dealing with stuff. I think it's such a huge continent with so many different MAs sitting within it that are at different stages of their development. You look sort of closer towards sort of South Africa, where they're maybe a bit more developed than certain other areas of the continent, and using them as maybe as a benchmark along with some of the North African countries and West African countries as well, and sort of learning from them and sort of talking more and communicating the best practices and using certain examples from each one could be a real way of sort of getting to that benchmark and setting that stage, and then building from there. I'm not too sure how much that's going on at the moment.
Yeah, I think very, very important points raised there, and we can appreciate that where African football is, at least most national associations, member associations, is exactly what you describe, Ebru. Theo. They're they're not really set up as businesses. I think that's one of the challenges we have at the moment. You know, they're not in the mindset of maximizing their revenues. That's why they have things such as bloated staff. As much as our federations here are understaffed, you will still find people in the federations who are there because they know so and so for political expediency and the like. And this is something that we need to change gradually. And also, as you said, with the support of companies like Deloitte, the advisory sector. So just to continue on this line, Theo, what are some of the services, for example, you're offering sports organizations to transform them to think more in a business manner, when to think more about maximizing their revenue and their long-term sustainability?
Sure. So just in the first instance, a lot of our clients are relatively sophisticated. So they already operate at sort of the more leading edge of the sporting environment. A good example, which I touched on earlier, where we worked recently, is with FIFA on women's football, and sort of looking to understand the challenges and where the current sort of level of various elements of the ecosystem are at. And looking at that is sort of benchmarking and consulting and gaining as much data as you can. I think within the African game, there's a lack of data, or credible data at least. And without the data to sort of underpin where you're looking to focus, it can be quite difficult. So in terms of where sort of Deloitte look to assist maybe entities that are more at that stage, it's in terms of understanding what sort of data you might need to, and then analyzing that data to provide some useful insights, benchmarking against other similar properties, and just finding best practices. I think that's where the African game is at the moment, is identifying where they can have learnings and have quick wins as well, to sort of start developing the game from a sort of more corporate side.
Excellent. And to continue with you, see, what we have been describing up until now is what I would say is the top-down approach to the development of football globally. That is the sporting pyramid. But at the same time, I think there is a need, and an urgent need, to get more people to invest in grassroots football, in the development of grassroots football. So how do you translate some of your work, Theo, for example, to the grassroots? You mentioned at the onset that you've done some work with the Right to Dream and the Mansour group. So what are investors looking for, and how can you support grassroots football communities to garner investment?
So at a grassroots level, I think we're all very aware of how much talent there is in the African environment. There's a lot of in Europe. There's so much to sort of highlight that. In terms of what investors look for, is just to be aware of the pathways. It's similar to sort of how FIFA look for funding reasons. Is they want to see that base level of criteria being met before they can really look more deeply into understanding whether or not there's an opportunity to invest. Even when it's more philanthropic, it's not necessary that they will still just look to invest in any area. They want to know that their money is going to the causes or the areas that they're most interested in. So for like sort of Mansour group, when they were investing, that was something that they were really keen to do. I can't obviously speak for their intentions, but they were very interested in sort of adopting what they'd seen in the Ghana model for Right to Dream in Egypt, and sort of having the credibility that they'd already shown a use case and shown how it's been developed in that country with such success. With sort of as a bit of a background, is Right to Dream sort of have a talent pathway where they bring through players towards either the best players go sort of towards the Danish football club that they also own, and sort of they give opportunities for sort of educational purposes as well to maybe some of the players that weren't quite ready to make it, and sort of giving giving them opportunities both from a sporting side and also from an educational side to sort of have a sort of better life, etc. So using that model, there was a lot of success. There's been a few players that have come through the academy that are currently playing for the Danish team, played in Champions League football and gone on to other teams as well, which is not only showing sort of
Sorry, I think we're losing you, Theo. Is it okay for you, Ebru?
Yes, it's okay for me. I can't hear him, but I think he's frozen. But I'm okay.
Okay, I think Theo is frozen. We'll just continue with you, Ebru, as maybe Theo sorts out his connection. And again, to grassroots football, I know you're a big advocate of the redistribution of monies made at the top to support grassroots football development. And now there is an increased focus in women's football. And there is a need to have sustained investment in growing the women's game as a grassroots and also professionally. What are some of the risks we should watch out for? What are some of the strategies you think we should apply in trying to redistribute these funds at the top? Also bearing in mind that in Africa, even the clubs, what you call elite clubs, cannot afford to sustain themselves. So there's need to be more innovative in this space. What are your thoughts? What are some of your ideas you'd have, Ebru?
Yeah. I think, first of all, there is an imminent, at least, discussion on how the financial fair play rules will be revised, because as they were fit for purpose when they were introduced back in 2011, and 10 years passed. We see that the overall losses and the indebtedness of European football has significantly reduced, and there are now more than half of the leagues that are profitable as a whole, which didn't exist before. Of course, there are some clubs and leagues that are unfortunately much more still continuing to make losses and stuff. But one thing that the financial fair play was not ensuring was it was one size for all, but it cannot be like that. Even the break-even limits, should have been a percentage of your revenues, for example, right? So whether you were a small club from Eastern Europe or one of the Premier League clubs, the amount of loss you can make per annum was the same, which doesn't work basically. So one of the newest discussions is about a luxury tax and having a salary cap, not per player, but overall as a team salary cap. So within that cap, you can do whatever you want, basically. One player could get 50% of the salary budget if that's what you want to do technically. But if you're exceeding that 70% ratio, salary to revenue ratio, then you're gonna pay what's called a luxury tax into this global pot, which will then be redistributed. But of course, if that fee is only a couple percentage points, then it's not as much of a deterrent to remain within certain limits. So it's still up for discussion. It's probably going to take a while before it's accepted by all the stakeholders. But then, of course, as you say, the right question is, let's say, a couple 100 million is collected in this fund. On what basis should it be distributed? What should it be used for? And in my opinion, if we also want to promote the football for all and football for good concept, it needs to go into the youth and to grassroots, because everyone thinks of grassroots as a little bit of CSR type project. It is not. If it starts at the right age, obviously it's gonna unlock even more talent. So it is very critical that certain rules are set in place to encourage private sector investment, like case of Mansour, for example. But equally, main concern why quite a few investors, banks, clubs or owners, that they shy away from investing in these lesser developed countries is the governance structures. I mean, you need to build the trust in the system. Otherwise, not everybody is investing, expecting big returns necessarily on their investments, but they want to make sure that they are used in the right way. So that is the important part. And the governance structures, again, no matter how much controls you put in place, if the people have bad intentions, they still unfortunately continue to exploit the system. It's unbelievable that 5-6 years after the raids on FIFA, for example, there are still some penalties being given out, new cases of corruption coming out. And I'm not only talking about financial corruption, but a lot of the times there is still, abuse, there is discrimination. So it's governance, better governance on all fronts that needs to be instilled and implemented.
Excellent. Welcome back, Theo. Sorry. I think we lost you there for a bit. And you can continue. And I'd just like you to touch on maybe something Ebru has said. Not everybody is looking for a return on investment per se, but they want their monies used in a manner that will enhance people's life, for example. And we are seeing these coming up. What do you call it? Impact investors. I don't know if you have any experience with this, if you can share with our audience.
Sure. So sort of looking at it sort of grassroots level, I think I'll just echo the comments already said around governance being key and that trust element. I think at the moment there is a perception, at least around sort of African football at grassroots level, that there's not that confidence from investors in order to sort of invest large sums. So obviously in the sort of situation around the right to dream, they had a credible sort of use case which they built up over a number of years, which gave the Mansour Group confidence that they were investing in a good sort of structure that they could then go and build and help them develop further with their sophistication as well. And then looking sort of in terms of returns, you've got obviously an economic return is often the case for sort of private equity and some investors into football, but there's a social element as well. And not necessarily the same thing, but what we see sometimes is in academies, especially football clubs in UK, is they spend a lot of time sometimes looking into what is the return on sort of their investment into the academy, and looking at it not just from how much we've managed to maybe sell players for. It's looking at how many minutes they've played in the first team and looking at those other elements which are a little bit harder to quantify. But if you sort of look at it long enough with enough data points, you can get a picture of how much return you're getting from not just the economic benefits, but also maybe the fact that you've got them playing in your first team, which meant you didn't have to go out and spend money on another centre back, etc. So I think from looking at the grassroots level, I think that is an area that Africa has a real good opportunity to focus on once they have those governance structures in place. But I think until those structures are in place, it's going to be quite difficult to really capture any growth and sort of any of the benefits that come out of sort of the pathways and the talent that reach out of that system. I think Ebru touched on it earlier around solidarity payments, and even where they are available for some of these sort of lower clubs, it's just hard for them to even track where these players have gone to, and sort of accessing that can be quite difficult. So it's in building up those structures to be able to do that is paramount to any future success that they have around grassroots and those talents coming through the system.
Excellent. We are coming up to the 45 minute mark. I think that's one half of a football match, and at this point, usually we would like to take some of the questions from our audience. And we have one here from Alfred Adu, directed to you, Ebru. If you're in a position to answer this, I think Theo has also done some infrastructure projects. It says, any recommendation to funds by FIFA for infrastructure development for soccer academies in Africa? I think this is alluding to grassroots football facilities. How can we get funds to develop facilities infrastructure at the grassroots level? I know at the moment, mostly we talk about the stadiums to host the major competitions and the big matches. But what about the grassroots proximity facilities?
First of all, there is no youth from outside of FIFA to the member association, right? So money can only come, from FIFA to a member association. So Alfred, whichever country you're in, you need to go with your idea to the federation and explain, what this kind of a infrastructure soccer academy idea, how can it be implemented in the best way? So neither CAF nor FIFA would ever give anybody direct, funding for these kinds of projects, unfortunately. But if your idea is a unique one and a different one about a 360-degree talent management where, players safeguarding, especially younger children's safeguarding, and good training practices, modern coaching, digital technology, all of that, if it's part of the project, then I'm sure it would be very useful for your federation. But for any individual looking for investors, unfortunately, that is very difficult to find unless, in the country, there is a big supporter of sports in terms of, being sponsors to different sports, like Mansur Group, maybe in your country, then it's very difficult, unfortunately, to find the support.
There's another one here by Ochiueda. Is there auditing reports on how the funds have been used by various member states? I think Ebru also have some experience in the FIFA National Association structure. Is it a requirement for member associations to give audited reports?
Yes, it is a requirement. And there's a great interactive map on FIFA website. Actually, you can go into continents, you can go into countries to see what kind of projects were done. So I think within Africa, 20 or 24 countries had made use of the FIFA Forward program, and you can go in and kind of see the breakdown of what has been done so far.
And you have Jabu here. How could funds that are given by FIFA to CAF and African Football Federation be better managed and accounted for by such STBs? What is your view on this, given the corruption at CAF in the past? Of course, we cannot really look into the corruption aspects of it. Probably this is not the forum. But how can these funds be better managed at the confederation and at the national association level?
I mean, one thing that is usually done, nothing to do with Africa or football, but if you're not trusting the organization you're lending money to or investing in, then the best thing is that you, as the global governing body, let's say, hire the consultant and pay them directly to deliver a project. Then you know exactly what is being delivered and where the money is going. So that's of course one aspect, and the other is a lot of European federations have their own national excellence centers, for example. So this is where you have regional pre-national team, let's say, camps, where kids at certain ages could be selected to pre-national team stages for private trainings and things like that. And FIFA could replicate that model, or CAF could replicate that model as CAF national excellence centers, where then the control would be at the confederation level and the same principles could be replicated in several different countries. So there are different ways to build capacity by retaining the control at a higher level initially. But that's of course not a long-term sustainable, structure.
Yeah, I think communication is key between FIFA, CAF, and the member associations, and then also making sure there's a structure in place that allows for sort of accountability in that. I think a point was raised earlier is around sort of independent body that can help sort of manage that process. As there's so much funds sort of available, it might be a useful investment to have that independent in-between intermediary to sort of manage the process to help both sides understand where the gaps are and where the development where the money can best be placed.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your insights and for taking the time to share with us this evening. And in Kenya, it's evening. Some people are joining us from other geographies of the world. It might be a different time, but we really appreciate, as we get to the hour mark, we would like to take your concluding remarks, really. And as I mentioned to you in the invitation, here we seek to educate, not only educate, but also inspire people to invest themselves in the development of the football sports industry in Africa. And it's a privilege to have professionals like you on the show to help us in doing this. So just starting with you, Theo, if you can share some concluding remarks as I go through some of the comments that are coming in.
Yeah, so firstly, thank you for the invite, and it's a pleasure to be on this forum. In terms of sort of final remarks, I'd say it's just to keep learning. I think that's the most important thing for African football, is to keep learning, try new things, and looking to develop in a sustainable way, looking at outside and sort of communicating and taking a more collaborative approach to development, so that everyone can sort of grow together rather than siloed, because there's such a great opportunity in African football to really elevate the game, and there's so many opportunities at the moment. As you've already seen, there's funds available if criteria is met, so looking to meet those standards and then moving up above that. It's a process and it won't happen overnight, but if enough people are interested and take it seriously, we could be in a really good place in a few years.
Super. Over to you, Ebru, to conclude for us. And again, just to recognize you as the 50th guest speaker on the Africa Football Business Show. It's a real privilege to have you. So thank you very much for gracing the show. And I think I'll also use this opportunity to prompt you to encourage more women to get into the game, and not just to play, but also in the leadership of football. I think this is also very important. So I'll give you the floor to give us your concluding remarks, and then we'll let you go and watch Galatasaray and Lazio.
Well, it's still 0-0, so that's the good news. Well, it's really the people who will instigate change, and I'm seeing more and more on the FBA course, like yourself, in several international conferences, many more people from Africa who are very, very well educated and have not been maybe involved in sport or football so much. But the quality of the people, as that increases, then the right governance structures, right management structures, right strategies will come in place as well. So we've seen that change happening a little bit earlier, maybe in Europe, first of all, where the generation that actually made football what it is Yes, some of them were in place for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. It was a all, white male decision making room in many cases, no women, no minority representatives. And unfortunately, there was a lot of groupthink, and they were way too comfortable in their inner circles of doing business without checks and balances, without the independent oversight. So, as that is being replaced by a new generation of very, very competent, open minded, and big believers in equality, then the decision making quality is changing as well, and it's trickling into more efficiency, better outcomes, and stronger organizations. And I think it's just a matter of time. I mean, look at the new CAF president. He's one of the richest men, in South Africa, and more people maybe like him who have their own business, who actually really want to make things better for people involved in football, whether they are playing or whether they're on the pitch refereeing or coaching, or whether they're in the offices administering. So I think we need better people to take control of football and global sports, and there are so many well qualified women and men out there who were not given a chance before.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was Ebru Koksal and Theo Ajadi. Again, another brilliant session here. Very insightful. Seeing some questions on the comments about how they can get this kind of information in soft copy for reading and stuff. So follow the Football Foundation for Africa on our various social media channels, and feel free to write to us as well. We are here trying to educate not only the continent but the globe on the best practices, bringing in brilliant professionals to help us by sharing their knowledge, expertise, and experience. So engage with us, and we'll find out ways of getting these kind of information to you in a manner that you can digest. We'll do our best towards that end. So thank you very much for all who joined us today. Again, another well-attended session with a good audience. And just as we wrap up again, it's always for us to recognize our sponsors, partners, that being OTB Africa, Parma Sports, See Beyond Leadership Forum, iSportLand, and the Football Business Academy. And when we are talking about building capacity, our last two mentions, that is iSportLand and Football Business Academy, are really new and innovative learning institutions where you can enroll to understand the business of sport, the business of football, and be able to contribute to the sustainable growth of the industry. So thank you very much again for all who joined us today, and we would like to wish you a good evening, a good afternoon, or a good morning from wherever you joined us. So see you in 2 weeks' time. We have a session on legal issues in football, looking specifically into the menace that is facing the continent now, that is match fixing. So please be sure to join us in a couple of weeks for another edition of the Africa Football Business Show. Goodbye for now.
Take care.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.